Hello, everyone, and welcome to this next installment of our HRX AMA. Tonight, we have Krista Moroder. She's currently an engineering manager at Checkr in San Francisco. She attended Hack Reactor cohort 40, and she worked as a full-stack software engineer before co-founding the creative agency NonQuixote. And that supported tech companies and educational organizations across the United States, Japan, Spain, and Italy. After 2 years dedicated to launching NonQuixote full-time, she moved into a passive partner role and joined Checkr. Before attending Hack Reactor, Krista launched some new initiatives at a congressionally authorized education think tank and received international awards for her work as an administrator and teacher. She's also worked as a theater technical director, film producer, public speaker, and served as a board member for multiple organizations. So tonight we're going to talk about what day-to-day life as an engineering manager looks like and lessons learned from starting your own business. So Krista, thanks for taking the time and welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right. So I want to start off by asking you, how did you first get interested in coding?
Yeah, so I'd say there was the passive getting interested and then the actually getting interested enough that I wanted to switch my career. So when I first started coding, it was sort of by accident. I was managing a theater and they had this horrible process for ordering new tickets where someone would call a woman who was a volunteer and she would ask how many tickets they wanted and then she'd tell them to mail her a check and then she'd mail the tickets back, and it was incredibly inefficient. So I basically built a website to put that online, and that was in my early 20s. And while I was building that, I had a friend who worked for an archery organization, and they had a website that could have been more efficient, and so I offered to rebuild their website for them. And he's like, great, pitch my boss and write a contract. And I was like, what? So I ended up Googling how to write a contract, how to, pitch someone on a project. And she said yes. And then asked when I would fly out to train them. And I'd actually never been on a plane before. So this is when I was 23 or 24 years old. And so my first plane ride was actually paid for by building this website and then training them how to maintain it. It was in Google Docs though, so it wasn't great. I got to do a little HTML and CSS, but it was enough to kind of make me interested to continue learning. And so then, long story short, 5 or 6 years later, I was working in education, and I ended up actually on a speaker panel about why teaching coding is important in schools. And I was the only person on the panel who couldn't code. And so I went home that weekend and was like, all right, now it's time. I'm just going to figure this out. And spent the weekend trying to teach myself. I think I went through all of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and jQuery in Code Academy in like 2 days and a lot of coffee. And by the time I finished it, I was like, I think I could actually go into this and maybe do it full time.
Wait, so you made a website using Google Docs initially?
Or Google Sites, sorry. So Google had a version. It was like Google Docs, kind of. Yeah. It's very drag and drop, but you could put in a little bit of custom code if you wanted.
Well, that's pretty cool. Were you writing JavaScript at that point, or was it like just make it look okay and have links?
Yes, make it look okay.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. That's a great start. Cool. So was it at that point when you were trying to like pick up Code Academy and learn more, is that what led you to Hack Reactor as a student then?
Yeah, I knew some people who had gone through Hack Reactor, and I wasn't planning on becoming a software engineer after Hack Reactor. I was planning on just taking a few months off of work, learning to code, and then going back into another education role. And I actually had an interview at the 6-week mark, that half-part week, with another education organization. And halfway through the conversation, I was like, I don't want to do this. And I actually cut it off and was like, I don't think this is a good fit for me anymore. Because by that point, I felt like I was the worst in my cohort, but technically, but I was so interested in it that I was ready to make a switch completely. So I decided halfway through, when I probably felt my lowest emotionally and technically, that was the time I wanted to do it.
Oh, wow. Okay. And can you remind me when, so cohort 40, when was that? Like what year was that?
2016.
2016. Okay, cool, nice. Dang, that's a little stressful too, like interviewing halfway through the program.
Yeah, I don't know why I took that interview.
Then, so how did your journey from Hack Reactor and graduating from Hack Reactor get you to where you are currently at Checkr then?
Yeah, so I guess I did a few things afterwards. The first place I went was a company called Globality, and I went there as a full stack developer, originally on the front end team, but I kind of switched to working on back end and technical spikes a few months in. And so that was my first move. And about a year into that, I started getting contacted by a bunch of the education organizations I had worked with in my past life. Because they had heard that I'd made the switch, and they were like, we're working on these different things related to coding initiatives. Do you have any opinions? And so it was one of those weird situations where I didn't have a company, but I basically had clients ready to go. And so I was like, well, there's no better time than right now to start a company. I reconnected with someone in my past life who also had a background that was in education and actually in storytelling, hence the creative agency. And so we decided to start a company together. And so that was the last 2 years. And from there, I ended up accidentally getting involved with a bunch of coding boot camps in different countries and helping them with their curriculum, and really, really enjoyed the people aspect, I would say, of engineering again. I had managed teams in the past. And so it was one of those situations where I realized I'd gone so far back into the management role that I wasn't ready to become a senior developer again. So when I came back to San Francisco, I decided to start looking for jobs in this capacity.
Cool. Wow. So, okay. So there's a few things we can talk about there. So when you started your, I'm curious, I haven't had my own company. I maybe I maybe had, distant dreams of starting my own company eventually, but no concrete action with that ever taken yet. What was that like? Did you know when you started your company, were you thinking, maybe this will work, maybe this won't, or were you thinking like, hey, this is a thing that people want and need, and it's going to take off? Like, what was that process like?
It was definitely the first one. I feel a little stupid for actually quitting my job. I'm really glad it worked out because of that, but it was one of those kind of like, well, we have people who are interested, so I think we'll have clients. I don't know if this will work out, but if it doesn't, not a big deal. Like, I can always become a software engineer again. And honestly, that's not, I think, security I felt before I learned how to code, because there's always that fear you're going to lose your job, you're not going to find something, but it's such a tangible skill that people need right now that I felt comfortable taking that risk, because even if it didn't work out, I figured it would be okay.
Gotcha. How did you end up getting your first few clients for that then?
So that was just people in my past life had contacted me because I had switched from education to engineering and just wanted to talk. And they were actually, a few of them had actually reached out about jobs, but I was like, I don't want to do this job anymore, but I will take you on part-time and have a full team to help out.
Yeah, there you go.
So it's basically converting just conversations about either full-time jobs or projects being worked on into actual contracts.
Nice. Was there a point where you realized, hey, this thing is actually working? Like, I really don't need to stress about it, crashing and burning anymore. Was there a point like that?
Yeah, actually there was. I think there were a few humps. There was the first, I don't know, the first 3 months was, oh God, what was this decision? Am I focusing on the right things? And then at about the 6-month mark, I realized, yes, we have clients. And then at 9 months, I was like, now we're getting paid. Because there's a huge gap between having clients and then actually getting paid, even if you ask to be paid up front. Especially with bigger companies, they might do net 30 or net 60, where we give you an invoice, you have 30 or 60 days to pay, because it takes a while to get through their system. So there were a good few months where we were not getting paid and we were doing a lot of work. And then I would say probably about a year and a half in, that's when we realized it was a thing, because we had more work than we were able to deal with. So we started bringing on part-time people to help out. And so I think that's when we both realized that it was working. And also I realized I really missed engineering and kind of wanted to get back into a tech company full time, because it was starting to shift more into a creative agency rather than engineering. And we had left it open when we started.
Nice. And then you went from that like full-time role did you go straight into Checkr then, or did you take some time off in between, or how did that work?
No, I'm an idiot. I should have taken time off. I took no time off in between. And actually there was probably the transition itself, I think, was a little bumpy, where I still was offloading work when I had started my new job. But I basically decided to start looking for jobs back in, I think, April for engineering management roles. And then I started this job at the end of May.
Oh, nice. So that was not a very long job search then, was it?
No, it was a lot faster than I expected. I was going to give myself the whole summer and then take some time off, and that did not happen. So I've already been there 3 months.
Nice. And it does sound like you made it like a very concerted decision to go for engineering manager roles and not for like an individual contributor role or anything of that sort.
Yeah. So I had been a manager in the past. I probably have spent 10 years as a manager before becoming an IC. And I was so burnt out when I left that I was like, I will never be a manager again. I hate it. But I think the turning point for me was actually in Japan. I was working with Code Chrysalis, which was the bootcamp started by Connie and Yan, who also went to Hack Reactor. And there was another instructor there who was very focused on a lot of our technical issues, and I was focused on a lot of our people issues. And we made a great team because of that. And we had a really good conversation where we realized that he felt good solving the technical problems, but burnt out by people problems, whereas I felt the opposite. I would sometimes get burnt out staring at technical issues, but if it came to people conversations, I'd get energized. And so I realized coming back, I'd kind of always just taken jobs as they've come, but with an engineering manager role, I figured this allows me to still stay involved technically, think about design, think about strategy, but get to pull on, my past decade of experience managing teams and projects, which I actually do enjoy now that I've had some space from it.
Nice. How was your job search for engineering manager similar or different than like your first ever job hunt after Hack Reactor?
Yeah, I think there actually were a few. So the differences there were definitely that once you've had at least one job in tech, you've kind of proven yourself and people are willing to take a chance on you. With engineering manager, though, it was similar because I think pretty much everyone that I know that's become an engineering manager has transitioned within their own company. So they were like a senior engineer and then they transitioned into that role. Whereas I was coming from the outside saying, hire me. I haven't been an engineering manager before, but I've managed a company, I've managed other teams, and I was kind of asking them to put a couple different things together on my resume and see that I had this combined skill set. And so in that sense, it was very similar, where some companies were like, we're not even willing to consider you unless you can prove you have 3 years of this experience. And other companies were willing to take a chance. So grateful for those companies that were willing to take a chance.
Yeah. So I wonder then, did it almost feel like your first job hunt again? Like trying to prove to people like, hey, I can actually do it. Like maybe my resume isn't the most, conventional in terms of what you want from me, but like, were you ever like asking people like, no, wait, like, no, give me a second chance. I can do it.
Yeah. And there's actually some good research around that, how some like, in general, I think there's this statistic that's thrown around where men will apply for jobs when they're 60% qualified and women will wait till they're 100% qualified. I think I apply sometimes when I'm 30% qualified. I'm just kidding. But this has happened a few times in my life where I've been able to apply for jobs where I felt like I had the skill set, but maybe not the actual title. And so when I became a school district administrator, I didn't have an administrative license. So I had to go through that then. When I went to go work at a think tank, most of my coworkers went to a really good school or had a PhD, and I had none of those. And so I feel like pretty much every job has been sort of that situation where it's like, all right, let me show you what I can do. Let me walk through my skill sets. If you think there's a match, great. If not, I'll just keep looking.
Sure. I'm curious, is that something that you think about very consciously as you just work and then you look for different positions, or do you think that's just how things have just ended up being?
I think just in general, because tech is changing everything so fast, jobs are so much more specialized and different than they used to be that you're probably not going to find someone who has that very traditional background. And there's so many transferable skills that I actually really enjoy talking to people when we're interviewing people for our team who have more of a hybrid background, because I think they bring something different. And even just looking at how I've been approaching my role in management at my current company is different than most people who've come through the traditional software engineer to management path. Like I have different ways I project manage, different ways I handle conversations with my team. And that's just because I have a background with non-technical teams and in education that makes me, I think, look at it a little differently. Right or wrong, it's different.
Yeah. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. I'm curious, so if there are like other alumni or potentially thinking about whether they want to be an engineering manager or not, what kind of things do you think they should think about to, first decide, like, hey, is it a right path for them or not?
Yeah, I would say, the first question I would ask myself would be, do you get energized by people issues, positive or negative? Because I think if you're the kind of person who gets burnt out by that, you're going to get burnt out in this job. And I think a lot of people are drawn to engineering because you get to solve very technical problems. But if you are more introverted, you can definitely do management, but you have to be very careful and conscious about that decision, because you probably will get burnt out if your day, like mine, is 8 hours straight of meeting and talking to people. I get maybe 1 hour a day to myself if I hide somewhere.
Gotcha. What does your day-to-day look like? My understanding is, engineering manager often protects the engineering team from kind of the higher up people and all the decisions that might get changed and whatnot. But yeah, in other contexts, it could be just someone who's helping, just literally manage the team and keep everyone together on the same page. What's your job like and what's your day-to-day like?
Yeah. So let's see, if I think back through my day, it's a lot of one-on-one conversations, but also meetings where I'm trying to get context from what everybody else is working on and make sure that my team has context. I'd say the way I kind of think about it is it's very similar to, in some ways it's similar to probably like a lead architect role, but instead of dealing with the code base, you're dealing with the operations of your team. So you're looking for where's their code smell? Where is there duplication that there shouldn't be? What processes are inefficient and need to be removed or altered? And are people happy with what they're working on? I think that's ultimately the most important, is making sure that the people on your team are happy with their jobs day to day, because if they're not, nothing's getting done. So I'd say that's probably number one. Gotcha.
Do you ever have opportunities to code, or do you actually look at code ever?
No, I don't look at code ever. I look at technical designs and I sometimes facilitate those conversations, but we do have technical leads on our team. And so my role is pretty far removed at this point from that. And that's okay. I think it's actually, I'm learning a new skill set, which is figuring out what the technical debt in our code is, for example, without actually looking at the code. So I have to ask a lot of questions to gain context in what our entire system looks like, so I can talk about it without actually being in our system. And that's been challenging and also a new skill I'm learning.
Gotcha. What do you do with that information then? What if you do find out, oh, wow, we do have a bunch of technical debt accruing? What do you do with that information?
Yeah, so build a strategy to handle it. So one of the things that I did when I started was I probably got 15 different books on actually technical debt and software metrics. and I've been working my way through all of them. And so right now it's bucketed in 3 areas, which is how do we identify our current technical debt, which is a mix of support issues that are resurfacing, what's in our backlog, what's in our engineers' heads, and then going from identifying to managing, which is how do we make it part of our development lifecycle? How are we making sure we're prioritizing the right things along with all of the other business things that come up on a constant basis? And then preventing, why was this technical debt occurring in the first place? There's some architecture decisions that we might have to make that reduce the scalability of our systems, but at the time, with the time and cost business pressure with our team, that was a good decision. And so looking at how that technical debt occurred, but also what technical debt is probably occurring right now because our processes are maybe not efficient or effective. So it's kind of those 3 areas that I'm trying to focus on right now.
Gotcha. Have you found any particular book or resource that you found especially helpful for you?
Yes, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Hold on 1 second. It's right here. All right. My 2 favorites have been these ones. Managing Software Debt by Chris Sterling, and then Managing Technical Debt by 3 people.
Okay.
But those have been the 2 that I found very practical. Like they've had some really good just mental models, frameworks, checklists, and I've been using those as a lot of the basis for some of my thinking around it.
Nice. I also like how you have it like just so handy. It is indeed nearby. Awesome.
I wasn't planning that, I promise.
I'm curious. So in terms of, so you have a bunch of engineers that report to you in terms of your org structure. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So then who do you report to, and what are what's your work measured against?
Yeah. So I report to, it's sort of right in it's different in every structure, but I report to our VP of engineering. And so he's working more on, we've got a few of them, but they work across multiple teams. And so he's working on bigger strategies around maybe recruiting and I guess developing our long-term technical vision and roadmap. I mean, there's a bunch of different things, but I guess what I'm evaluated on is, I guess, how well my team is performing, and they also evaluate me actually. So we do 360 feedback. So I get feedback from my team on whether or not they are satisfied with the level of management that I'm providing. And then I set goals that are in line with our company goals. So right now mine are around technical debt, building out a long-term vision, making sure we're meeting our product commitments, and then also actually around recruiting because we are doubling the size of our team in the next year. And so I've been pretty involved in that as well.
Gotcha. I had a question, but hold on. I'm going to try for another like 10 seconds to see if I remember what I wanted to ask. Oh yeah. How was that like 360 review process? Is that something you were used to, or was it brand new? Was it an adjustment to get used to that?
Yeah, I'm used to it because I guess I've been in management before, and we had a similar system set up where you're managed or you're given feedback both by your peers, people above you and below you. And so, yeah, if you've never done it before, I think it's really useful because it gives you something to focus on and something to fix. Because what worries me is when you're only getting feedback from the people above you because they don't see what you're like day to day. And so I really value the feedback I get from my team because, I mean, ultimately I report to them. Like they're the ones that I'm trying to make happy and satisfied. And so if I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing my job.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's fair. Great. You also mentioned that you help out with the recruiting and doing interviews. Is that a big part of your kind of like week to week in terms of like number of hours you spend?
Mm-hmm. Yes, for hiring, by the way.
Nice.
Yeah, so right now I do some open recruiting where I reach out to people I find on LinkedIn or wherever. I've definitely posted stuff in Hack Reactor before the channels. And then I've also been doing a lot of the closing conversations. So after someone's through our 5-hour, 4-hour interview process, I'll do the last 30 minutes with them, ask them how it went, answer any questions they have, kind of talk a little bit more about what it's like working at Checkr from a hiring manager perspective. And that's actually really fun because I like meeting all the candidates.
Yeah. Is there anything about being a hiring manager that you didn't expect, or maybe other people might not expect if they haven't done hiring themselves?
Yeah, let's see. I think the one thing I didn't expect was how similar it is to the same type of role in a non-technical context. I didn't know how much of a learning curve there would be switching to an engineering manager from the other management roles I've done, and it's so similar in so many ways. So I'd say that was surprising, and a good surprise. I'd say for people who've never hired before or have been in that role, I think what always surprises me is how unprepared a lot of candidates are. And that sounds really bad, and it makes me sound like a teacher, but I mean, so many places I've worked have given out a blog post or an article or a document that says, make sure you do these things before you come in. And a lot of people don't do those things before they come in. And so I'd say if you are trying to get hired, read what they give you. And if you are in a hiring position, just know that that will happen and be patient.
That's fair. Are there any other like really simple things, or potentially simple things that could be easily corrected that that you often see?
When people are trying to get hired or candidates, I'd say the main one is just come prepared. Like that's it. Yeah, I feel like read the blog, read what their stack is, read what they're working on. Maybe practice a few things, like practice setting up some basic API routes, practice, looping through some nested data, because you're going to see these in interviews. So make sure you do those things. And if they tell you you're going to do those things, you're definitely going to do those things. So do it once before you show up.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's fair. And you can answer the next question as much detail or as little detailed as you like, but have you found that at your company that you prefer like certain types of interview questions and you certainly don't like other types of questions? Because typically when people are on their job hunt, you hear, oh, you should really practice your TOEIC problems, and some people only see TOEIC problems during the job interviews. But other people will only see code challenges, one-day code challenges day in and day out. Have you found, what have you found works for your company so far?
I really like how our company does it, because the questions we ask are very focused on experience. And we kind of take you through basically a lot of our architecture as we do those challenges. And so the one problem with that, I think, is people who don't have experience don't do well, because you can't just fake your way through it and, do some fancy data structure algorithm technique you learn to kind of fake your way through it. You actually have to know what you're doing. And so I think we do well with people who are experienced and have that experience. We don't do great with people who maybe are stronger in like a CS class, but haven't had that hands-on experience. So actually we do great with people who've been through boot camps.
Oh, nice. It's pretty handy.
A few years out though.
Fair. What kind of positions are you currently hiring for then?
Engineers. Lots of different levels, but we also don't do a traditional tech lead model. We have a lot of senior engineers who will be tech lead for certain projects. And the reason we do that is so people don't get burnt out being tech leads. It is exhausting constantly being the person that others are going to. And so we give people a break so that they can just do what they want to do, which is sometimes head down and code and just implement a feature. And so, I think it's a little different for people who are used to more of a hierarchy, because you may have been the tech lead in your old company, and now you might be in a room with 3 other tech leads, and you may be tech lead on this project, but you might not on the other one. And so I think it's nice, and everyone who's part of it really enjoys it, but it is a different model.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm also curious about your thoughts on onboarding new engineers, because I remember reading or listening to an interview about just different onboarding strategies at different companies once people get hired. Do you have a either a personal philosophy or does your company have a philosophy in terms of how onboarding should work or shouldn't work?
Yeah, I mean, our company definitely has a structure in place that I think is pretty good. It's definitely more structured than probably any company I've ever been at. In our team right now, one of the things that we do in the first week is we pair people up and actually have them pair program through problems together. So it's very Hack Reactor style, but it seems to work pretty well because I especially like it when two people start at the same time because it makes that process easier rather than having someone who's trying to work through features slow down and have to help someone catch up to speed. So having two people who are already slow, stick them together, somehow that makes them move faster. I guess it's the Hack Reactor way. I don't know.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Next, I'm wondering, for people that want to be engineering managers. Oh no, actually, yeah. What was your interview process like for engineering manager positions? Did I ask this already? I forget how much we
No,
talked.
you didn't ask it. Yeah. So let's see. From a technical perspective, I had to walk through some architecture of different things that I had worked on in the past. I had just finished a few months of teaching. Actually, probably the last 2 years I was teaching on and off. I had built actually the whole curriculum for a coding bootcamp in Spain from scratch. And so I felt pretty comfortable with that. That was a lot of work. Yeah, imagine Hack Reactor cohort 1. That's basically create the curriculum as you go. And so one of the last big lectures that I gave in Japan was about 12-factor app methodology and going through microservice architecture. And so that's basically what I did was I kind of just went off on that lecture through my head and drew the whole thing. And it was actually a lot of fun. So I felt really strong on that one. And then after that, it was probably about 3 different interviews based on just management experiences. And for that, I actually pulled most of my examples from before I was an engineering manager, before coding. And it sometimes felt like, here are all my war stories and everything that went wrong. It kind of felt like that a little bit because it was questions around, I don't know, hiring, firing, performance plans, the really difficult conversations you sometimes have to have. And unfortunately, I do have stories for a lot of those. And so it was sharing those stories and explaining what went well, what didn't, what the lessons I learned were, and I guess just sharing my insights on what it would be like to work with me.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, do you have any tips for someone? So I know you noted that a lot of people who eventually become hiring managers, if they were engineers initially, kind of do a role switch within their own company.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips in terms of how someone might make that transition a bit more gradual, or how they might approach talking to their own manager about doing such a thing?
Yeah, I would say just say that that's what you want to do. Because one of the things I've noticed is, and this has been throughout my entire career, is some people are very forward about where they want to be. And they're very direct about where they want to be in their career, and others are not. And the ones who are more direct and open about where they want to go end up in those roles. And I mean, I've seen it everywhere that I've worked. Some people are like, I would like to be this. And then that person's manager will actively make sure they're giving them opportunities to work towards that. So if that's something you're interested in, you should say it. So that's number 1. And you shouldn't be coy about it. Just say, this is what I'm interested in. How do I get there? How can you help me get there? So that's number 1. To make it, to, I guess, build towards it is to start thinking about things like people, to get good at things like in a team conversation, making sure that everybody's opinions are heard, making sure that you're doing things like documenting. And I don't mean taking notes. I mean, if something is getting repeated over and over, are you the person who thinks, maybe we should turn this into a process, or maybe we should turn this into a system so that we're not repeating ourselves every single month when someone new is hired or when this is happening. So it's sort of putting on that hat of it's less about me and more about the whole team and making sure that the whole team is effective. And so I'd say that's kind of the shift that happens.
Gotcha. Do you have any plans in terms of where you want to take your career in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
No. So far, I've just kind of made it up. The philosophy I generally go by is, what do I want to learn next? And is someone willing to pay me to learn that thing? So with this role, that's sort of what made me want to switch to it. I was curious what it would be like to be a manager in a tech organization, because I had done it in a non-tech organization. That's a learning curve I wanted. I wanted to learn more about technical debt, more about building metrics and making a case for certain things. And that's why I made this decision. So I have no idea what's going to happen in 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
That's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, I'm pretty much coming up to the end of my questions here. Just have a couple more. The first one is, if you have any tips for people who are just graduating, do you have any tips for them now that you've been, working after Hack Reactor for a while?
Yeah, I would say the 2 things to really think about are, 1, make sure that you're actively growing in your first or second roles. There's a huge difference between, I think, candidates who are 3 years out, depending on what mentorship opportunities they've had. We've interviewed a lot of people who have spent 3 years in a certain place and have grown a lot, can take on project technical lead roles, and are really, really strong. And then we've also interviewed people who are 3 years out, and not Hack Reactor specifically, but anywhere, who are not very strong because they weren't being actively mentored and they didn't have those opportunities. And so it's similar to Hack Reactor, where you get as much as you put into it. And so if you are in a position where you are not actively growing and actively getting opportunities, find a way to make sure you're in that position. So I'd say that's the most important thing after getting your job. For getting your job itself, stay strong. It'll happen. Yeah. Make sure you're prepared for interviews. I guess that's the one thing I can't stress enough, because I see it all the time that people aren't. And so just make sure that whatever they're giving you, you're reading and you're practicing and you're going in, then doing the best that you possibly can.
Awesome. Great. Do you have any other final words that you want to say? Maybe it's something we haven't covered, maybe anything else that's been on your mind?
Let's see. I mean, we're hiring. I think we have a great team, honestly. I feel like I walked into a really good situation. We just hired someone from Hack Reactor actually on our team, so I'm pretty excited about that. And I think we're hiring probably 50 plus people in the next year. So
Whoa.
Please apply. Yeah, San Francisco and Denver office.
Wow. How large is your team right now?
Actually, my math is probably off, because if we have 90 right now and we're trying to double, that's actually about 100 we're probably trying to hire. So 50 in San Francisco, 50 in Denver. So send me your resume, please.
Awesome. Well, so this is being recorded at the end of August 2019. If people are, watching this and listening to this, pretty much in real time, how should they get in touch with you?
Let's see. I guess my email is at Checkr. Otherwise, just reach out on the Slack channel. That's probably easiest. Awesome.
Sounds good. Well, Krista, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. And thanks to everyone that listened and watched. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.